The stories. A final 911 call from a mountain diner. On a foggy morning in late October of 2015, emergency dispatch in Cascade County logged a short but chilling 911 call. The call came from a roadside diner that sat along Route 8, high in the northern ridge. Locals called it Harper's Stop, a small wood-paneled building known for its pancakes and its unreliable cell service. The recording lasted 42 seconds, filled mostly with static, and the voice of a woman repeating the same words. "Something's wrong with the lights," she said. "Tell them to hurry." Then silence, followed by a faint metallic sound, and the line went dead. Earlier that morning, the woman behind that call, Denise Rourke, had opened the diner alone. She was 48, a mother of 2 grown sons, and had worked there for nearly 2 decades. Denise was used to quiet mornings. Most weekdays, she brewed coffee by 5:30 and unlocked the front doors by 6. That day started no different. She had texted her coworker that she might close early because of a storm warning. The temperature had dropped overnight, and the power lines above the road had already begun to hum with frost. By 9, a delivery driver named Travis Neal stopped by with a shipment of syrup containers. He later told deputies that Denise seemed distracted and kept glancing toward the windows. He asked if she was all right, and she mentioned hearing a strange buzzing sound coming from the utility pole outside. Travis didn't hear anything unusual. He helped her carry the boxes inside, signed the invoice, and left around 9:30. According to his statement, the diner was completely empty when he pulled away. Around 10:15, the same storm alert flashed across local radio stations, warning drivers to avoid the upper ridge after noon. By then, fog had started to roll in. A retired couple named the Brodus drove by the diner around 10:45. They later reported seeing the neon sign flicker erratically, glowing orange, then pale blue. Mrs. Brody said the building looked darker than usual, almost like the lights were fading from inside. They kept driving because it was drizzling, but she remembered glancing back and noticing the door slightly open. The 911 call came in at 11:08. Dispatch logs showed multiple attempts to redial the number, all unsuccessful. The nearest patrol unit was 30 miles away, but 2 deputies were sent to check it out. They arrived at Harper's Stop at 11:47. According to their written report, the front door was closed when they got there, and the windows were fogged from inside. The deputies called out for Denise, but got no response. When they entered, the diner smelled faintly of ozone and something sweet, like burnt syrup. The lights were on, but dim, flickering in a steady rhythm. In the kitchen, the coffee pot was shattered on the floor, and a chair had been knocked over near the counter. Denise's phone was found beside the register, open to the 911 keypad. Her keys and purse were still there. The deputies searched the surrounding area for nearly an hour before requesting backup. No footprints were visible outside the diner due to the wet ground. The nearest surveillance camera was over a mile down the road at a gas station. It showed only one vehicle passing between 11 and noon, a white utility truck heading east. The plate was unreadable due to fog. By late afternoon, the search had expanded to the nearby forest line. A volunteer named Clay Benton claimed he heard faint humming coming from the woods around 4 that day. He described it as an electrical whine, repeating every few seconds. The search team investigated but found nothing unusual besides broken branches and what looked like melted patches of snow despite the cold air. Investigators collected samples, but the lab reports listed them as inconclusive. 2 days later, a utility worker named Janine Keller contacted the sheriff's office. She said her team had been called out to inspect the same power line above Harper's Stop the day before the disappearance. They had replaced a damaged transformer that had been leaking oil and producing static interference. According to her maintenance log, the old transformer had tested unusually hot before removal. The technician who handled it had taken a thermal photo for documentation. In that photo, investigators later noticed a faint human-shaped outline reflected in the metal casing, but it was too blurred to confirm anything. After a week, the search officially shifted from rescue to recovery. Deputies combed through Denise's personal files, text messages, and banking records, Nothing indicated financial trouble, mental distress, or plans to leave. Her car was still parked behind the diner with a nearly full tank. Forensics teams rechecked the interior and found no signs of forced entry. The only trace that puzzled them was a small ring of black residue near the base of the power outlet beside the counter. The residue tested positive for carbon, but lacked any organic material. Local rumors grew fast. Some said the transformer had caused an electrical discharge that traveled through the diner wiring. Others suggested she might have stepped outside to check the lights and slipped down the steep embankment. A few locals even claimed the fog carried a low humming sound for days afterward, though weather reports listed no unusual conditions. Dispatch reviewed the 911 recording again, isolating the last 3 seconds. Audio technicians later reported a faint secondary voice overlapping Denise's. It was too distorted to make out words, but carried a different pitch, almost mechanical. In early December, after snow had settled across the ridge, a new team conducted a final sweep using thermal drones. They discovered a faint heat pattern near the base of the same utility pole Denise had mentioned that morning. Digging revealed a melted patch of earth containing fragments of ceramic, a silver ring later confirmed to be hers, and scorched soil fused with metal particles. The official report listed the cause of disappearance as undetermined, possibly related to accidental electrocution combined with environmental exposure. The diner was closed permanently that winter. For years after, passing drivers claimed to see flickering lights inside the boarded building. Some thought it was leftover wiring sparking through damp insulation. Others said it was reflection from headlights hitting the old neon sign. In 2019, when the structure was finally demolished, workers found a dark stain on the concrete foundation, shaped like an uneven circle about 3 feet wide. The demolition foreman later told a local paper that their equipment sensors briefly spiked near the spot, showing a surge even though the power had been disconnected. The original 911 recording is still kept in the county archive. Dispatchers who train new hires play it during orientation, warning them that rural calls often come with long delays and little context. The official log lists it as call terminated, unknown cause. Unofficially, some still refer to it as the Mountain Diner case. To this day, no one can say for sure what happened inside Harper's Stop that morning. The power company insists all lines were within safety limits, and the sheriff's office closed the file after 5 years with no further leads. But on cold days, when fog rises across the ridge, travelers still talk about the diner that once glowed like a lantern in the mist, where a woman called for help because something was wrong with the lights and no one reached her in time. The stories. What was hidden under the highway billboard? On a stretch of highway outside a small town in northern Georgia, a faded billboard once stood above a forgotten service road. It advertised an old diner that had closed in 1999, yet the sign remained, its paint chipped and letters barely readable. For years, locals drove by without a second glance, until a county maintenance crew made a strange discovery in the summer of 2019. The day had started ordinary for Ethan Price, a 36-year-old maintenance supervisor for the county's highway department. His crew was scheduled to clear brush and inspect old signs along Route 47. It was humid, the kind of southern morning that left sweat on a man's back before sunrise. Ethan's only goal was to finish early and catch his son's baseball game. Around mid-morning, his co-worker, a quiet guy named Ramon Ortega, called out from behind the billboard. "You might want to see this," he said. Ethan walked over, brushing through thick vines that wrapped around the steel posts. The ground there had sunk unevenly, almost like something below had shifted. When Ramon's shovel hit something hard, both men froze. At first, Ethan thought it might be old construction debris. But the sound was too solid, too metallic. They cleared more dirt and uncovered the corner of a rusted steel box, about the size of a small trunk. There were no markings, just a lock fused with rust. Ethan radioed the office, reporting a potential hazard, and was told to document everything before moving it. He snapped photos with his work phone, marking the GPS coordinates. County protocol required they check with the sheriff's department if buried containers were found on public land. Within an hour, a deputy arrived, along with a man from the fire marshal's office. They lifted the box with gloved hands and placed it on the tailgate of a truck. The lock gave way easily once they pried it open. Inside were stacks of weathered papers wrapped in plastic, a small reel of 8mm film, and what looked like a badge case. The air carried a faint chemical smell, maybe from old film stock or decay. The deputy, Officer Langford, sealed everything in evidence bags and told Ethan they'd contact him if they needed a statement. That night, Ethan couldn't shake his curiosity. He told his wife, Megan, that the box reminded him of something buried on purpose, not by accident. The next day, rumors spread fast. Someone claimed it might be tied to a missing person case from decades earlier. By the weekend, an article appeared in the local paper mentioning archived records recovered from beneath an old billboard. Months passed before Ethan heard anything more. Then, in early 2020, a retired journalist named Carol Hayes contacted him. She said she'd been researching unsolved disappearances linked to Route 47. According to her notes, a county tax auditor named Dale Norwood vanished in 1982 after leaving work in Dalton. His car was found abandoned near that same stretch of highway, engine still warm, but he was never located. Carol told Ethan that archived dispatch logs from that night mentioned a billboard inspection in the same area. She believed the steel box might contain Norwood's missing field records. With permission, she reviewed the recovered contents at the sheriff's office. Most of the papers were tax ledgers and road inventory lists, but one folder stood out, labeled Personal Notes, DN, in faded blue ink. Inside were handwritten pages describing cash discrepancies at several county construction projects. One entry mentioned a company called Oak Ridge Materials, which had won repeated contracts despite low bids. Another page referred to off-the-books equipment storage near mile marker 29, the same place the billboard once stood. The final note ended abruptly, mid-sentence, dated 2 days before Norwood disappeared. The 8mm reel was sent to the state lab for conversion. What appeared on the restored footage was grainy but clear enough to identify shapes. It showed a nighttime scene of trucks unloading crates beneath a highway sign. Several men appeared in the frame, one of them wearing a badge that resembled the one found in the box. Investigators cross-referenced old employment rosters and discovered that at least 2 of those men worked in the County Roads Division in the early 80s. Both had retired before 2005, and one had passed away years earlier. Officially, the sheriff's office reopened the Norwood case as a suspicious disappearance under review. But beyond a few interviews and media mentions, nothing public came from it. Carol continued digging through archived permits and financial records, uncovering more ties between Oak Ridge Materials and county supervisors from that period. When she shared her findings with Ethan, she said she believed Norwood had documented a kickback scheme involving asphalt contracts. Ethan listened, uneasy. He'd grown up in that county, knew some of the old families, and recognized one of the surnames Carol mentioned. He advised her to be careful. She laughed, saying she'd been chasing old ghosts her whole career. 2 months later, Carol's apartment was burglarized, her laptop taken, and several boxes of research papers gone. Nothing else was touched. According to police reports, there was no sign of forced entry, and her door locks were undamaged. She replaced her equipment and told friends she had backups, though she never shared what was in them. By early 2021, she moved away to live with her sister in Alabama. She told Ethan by email that she'd learned more than she wanted to know and was leaving it behind. In 2022, the county quietly removed the old billboard. The land beneath it was graded and turned into a drainage easement. When Ethan drove by that summer, the site looked ordinary, just gravel and grass. Yet every time he passed, he thought about the steel box, the film reel, and the pages in Norwood's handwriting. He later heard from a contact in the county records office that some of those papers had been sealed indefinitely under a confidentiality order. The official reason cited, ongoing administrative review. Unofficially, no one seemed eager to reopen anything connected to the early 80s contracts. People still mention the story now and then. Some say the missing auditor was seen years later in Florida, living under another name. Others claim the film was staged by someone trying to frame local officials. There's never been proof either way, only fragments of evidence left behind under a billboard that no longer exists. Ethan eventually transferred to another district, closer to his wife's family. He kept one photograph from that day, showing the box half buried in red clay. Sometimes he studies it, wondering who buried it and why they chose that spot. The coordinates, the papers, and the film all point to something hidden in plain sight, yet no one seems willing to dig any deeper. Officially, the case remains open but inactive. Unofficially, those who worked on it avoid questions. The stretch of highway looks ordinary again, quiet and harmless under the southern Sunday, but if you stop at mile marker 29, there's still a faint impression in the dirt, shaped like the corner of a box that was never meant to be found. Years later, when county crews replaced the signage, one worker reportedly found a small metal tag wedged deep in the soil. It bore the faded initials DN. The man handed it to his supervisor, who filed it with other lost items. No one knows what became of it after that. The file, the film, and the name Dale Norwood remain listed in county archives as unresolved. People driving that highway today would never guess what once lay hidden beneath a billboard that had promised hot coffee and fresh pie. For most, it was just another roadside relic. But for a few who remember, it marks the place where truth almost surfaced before being quietly buried again. The stories. A storm hit, and the lighthouse camera kept recording. The archived footage from the Harrow Point Lighthouse was first reviewed in 2021, nearly 10 years after the storm. Investigators found that the old surveillance camera, wired to a backup battery, had kept running long after power was lost to the coast. What it captured that night still divides locals who remember it. In late October of 2011, a maintenance contractor named Colin Mercer arrived at Harrow Point for what was supposed to be a routine inspection. He was 38, a former Navy technician who'd taken contract work after moving inland with his wife. The job that day was simple: check the beacon's rotation motor, replace the corroded railing bolts, and leave before the weather turned. The forecast called for heavy rain by sunset, but the coast was calm when he parked near the access gate around noon. Colin signed in through the caretaker's radio, climbed the narrow staircase, and set up his toolkit near the top landing. The light kept turning slow and steady over the gray water, and he told the caretaker over the radio that he'd be done by 4. Around 3:30, a storm alert came through the harbor office. Gusts up to 70 miles per hour and a small craft warning effective immediately. Colin acknowledged the call, but said he could finish tightening the bolts within 15 minutes. Witness statements from the harbor later confirmed he sounded calm, even joking about making it home before dinner. By 4, the first bands of rain struck the lens housing. The camera mounted below the gallery caught the shift in light. The sea blurred to a sheet of moving silver, and spray climbed the tower windows. In his final recorded transmission, Colin said he was packing up and would start down once the wind eased. That transmission cut off mid-sentence. The caretaker, a retired fisherman named Reed Hollis, said he tried to reach Colin again for nearly half an hour. He reported hearing faint static on the open channel and what sounded like metal scraping against glass. When the storm reached full strength, the signal was gone entirely. Search teams couldn't reach the lighthouse until the next morning. The causeway had flooded, and debris from broken docks blocked the road. When they finally arrived, the upper hatch was open, and Colin's gear was still in place. His hard hat lay on the landing, dented but intact. The harness cable was coiled neatly near the wall. The only thing missing was Colin himself. Archived reports describe the scene in careful detail. The door had not been forced, no sign of a fall or struggle, and no footprints beyond his own. The only clue came from the security system, a single camera mounted just under the main light. It had continued recording through the night, powered by its backup battery. When investigators reviewed the footage, the timestamp showed intermittent frames between bursts of lightning. At roughly 7:20 that evening, a shape appeared near the railing. The quality was poor, but it seemed to be a person wearing a jacket similar to Colin's. The figure stood facing the sea for several minutes, before the image distorted with wind-driven rain. When the lens cleared briefly, the figure was gone. The Coast Guard later retrieved partial radio data from a nearby weather buoy. Around that same time, the buoy's microphone recorded what sounded like a distant voice repeating a single phrase, though the words were unclear. Analysts slowed the tape and proposed several interpretations. Some claimed it was the word help. Others said it matched a different word entirely, possibly hold. Collins' family pressed for further investigation, and a private firm was hired in 2012. They brought specialized divers to check the rocks below the tower. They found no remains, but they did recover a toolbox wedged between two boulders, its metal sides scraped as if it had been dragged across stone. The serial number matched Collins' issued gear. A year later, a former harbor dispatcher named Inez Forrester came forward with a statement. She said she remembered receiving a shortwave call that night through an old emergency frequency. The voice had identified itself as Harrow Point and asked for clearance to power down the beacon. She logged the call but didn't forward it because she assumed the storm had triggered an automated alert. The recording of that exchange was later lost during an equipment upgrade. By 2014, official reports listed Colin Mercer as missing, presumed drowned. Still, the footage from the lighthouse kept circulating among investigators and maritime enthusiasts. Some claimed to see details, others missed. A few said the figure's movement looked wrong, that the jacket seemed too rigid, like it was hanging rather than worn. Others dismissed those claims as compression artifacts from the old camera. When the state archives digitized the remaining files in 2021, technicians noticed something new. During one lightning flash, a reflection on the inside of the glass showed part of the gallery behind the lens. In that reflection, just for a few frames, another outline appeared. It was shorter, wearing a cap, positioned near the inner railing where the service ladder ended. Records confirmed no one else had clearance to be there after 4 that day. Reed Hollis, who passed away in 2018, had once mentioned in a recorded interview that he believed someone else had accessed the lighthouse during the storm. He said he'd seen an unfamiliar pickup parked halfway down the service road when he left the harbor that afternoon. The truck was gone when he returned the next morning, but fresh tire marks led up to the gate. That lead was checked years later but went nowhere. The weather records for that night showed several vehicles stranded by flooding near the main highway, and none were registered to anyone connected with the site. Forensic analysts revisiting the case suggested a simpler explanation. Colin may have attempted to secure the external hatch, been caught by a gust, and fallen into the sea. The figure seen on the footage could have been an optical reflection of the camera operator earlier in the day. They noted that the camera's glass often created ghost images under bright flashes. Still, one detail never quite fit. The timestamp after 7:30 kept running, showing the storm fading overnight. At 8:10, long after Colin was gone, the camera recorded the beacon's manual power lever moving from active to standby. No one was logged on site, and the mechanism required a firm physical pull. Technicians confirmed no automation existed on that model. Someone had moved the lever by hand. By dawn, the beacon stopped rotating, though the lens remained lit on backup power. The caretaker found it that way when he returned, the beam frozen over the quiet morning sea. Over the years, local sailors began a small ritual. Each October, on the anniversary of the storm, they paused as their ships passed Harrow Point and looked toward the dark glass of the old tower. They said that when lightning flashed, the beam inside still flickered once, like a single frame of the old footage repeating itself. Officially, the disappearance of Colin Mercer remains unsolved. The final report cites adverse weather and accidental loss. Yet the archivists who reviewed the restored recording in 2021 noted one last anomaly. At the end of the tape, as the image fades to gray, a faint reflection shows a shape leaning over the console. It looks like someone checking a control switch, head bowed against the light. When the technician enhanced the frame, the face was obscured by glare, but the collar patch on the jacket was visible. It wasn't the contractor's company logo. It was the crest of the Old Coast Service, an agency that had shut down in 1987. No record exists of anyone from that service assigned to Harrow Point after that year. The final note in the archive log states only that the image was inconclusive and possibly the result of digital interference. The file remains stored under restricted access, labeled simply with the date and a short description. Harrow Point. Storm night recording. Source verified. So, from the claims, the stories. This forgotten rest stop is a missing persons clue. In late 2013, a road maintenance crew found something unusual near an abandoned rest stop off Route 47 inches northern Missouri. Buried beneath a cracked concrete slab was a weathered backpack filled with photographs, receipts, and a folded road map marked with red circles. None of it made sense until someone recognized a name on a faded motel key tag inside the bag. That name matched a missing person case from 2002. The case had gone cold after a college student named Lila Heron vanished while driving home from a spring break trip. She was 21, studying biology, and last seen fueling her car in a small town about 60 miles south of where the backpack was found. Investigators at the time believed she may have run off on her own, but her family never accepted that. The day Lila disappeared was ordinary at first. She left a message for her roommate saying she'd be home by nightfall, then got on the highway before noon. Weather reports from that day mentioned light rain and heavy wind gusts near the hills, making visibility poor. A truck driver later reported seeing a silver sedan pulled onto the shoulder, hazard lights blinking, but couldn't confirm the plate. That sighting was filed, but never verified. The backpack changed everything. It was found sealed in a trash bag under years of dirt and concrete dust, suggesting someone had hidden it intentionally. Inside were snapshots of gas stations, empty parking lots, and a photo of a motel sign with half the letters missing. The motel name appeared handwritten on a torn page that said, "Stay quiet, meet before dawn." Detectives reopened the case that summer. Detective Mara Klein, who led the new review, spent weeks comparing the items against archived evidence. She found that the motel in one photo matched a structure near Lake Arvin, about 20 miles west of Lila's last confirmed stop. By the time they checked it, the building had collapsed after years of neglect. Local archives held no business records, but an older resident remembered the place closing around 2005 after a fire in one of the rooms. Using archived phone records from 2002, Mara traced a series of short outgoing calls from Lila's phone pinging near that same area. The calls lasted under 10 seconds, all to the same number. That number belonged to a prepaid phone sold in Kansas City a month before she vanished. No registered name was linked to it. What made it stranger was that the prepaid number later connected to a gas station security call reporting a fight near the pumps the same evening. A witness who worked at that station recalled a young woman matching Lila's description, arguing with a man driving a dark green pickup. He remembered her shouting something like, "You said it was safe," before the man pulled away. Police at the time dismissed it, thinking it unrelated. That clerk, now retired, confirmed his old statement when Mara interviewed him again. He still remembered the fear in her voice. Investigators returned to the rest stop site to examine the soil around the buried backpack. Forensic testing found traces of oil and rust flakes consistent with old pickup truck parts. A tire tread print, faint but measurable, matched a model commonly used on farm trucks from the late 90s. Local farm equipment records from that period listed one such vehicle registered to a repairman named Cale Dorson, who frequently worked in the same region. Dorson had died in 2007 in a roadside crash, but archived county work logs confirmed he serviced multiple highway rest stops during the spring of 2002. Dispatch notes showed he reported unexpected company one night around the time Lila disappeared, mentioning a stranded motorist who got spooked and left. That report was handwritten, never followed up, and stored with unrelated maintenance papers. When Mara examined that dispatch note, she noticed a smudge near the signature line. Under magnification, it appeared to be a partial fingerprint, matching Lila's from her college ID records. The note had been handled, folded, and stored for years, but the match was clear enough to confirm contact. That meant she had physically interacted with the worker that night, possibly at that same rest stop. Further review of nearby highway surveillance archives from 2020 recorded before the old system was decommissioned, showed faint outlines of a secondary trail behind the rest stop leading toward a drainage ditch. Survey teams dug there and uncovered an old metal box half sunk into mud. Inside were corroded batteries, bits of wire, and a disposable camera. After restoration, technicians recovered 6 photographs showing a parked pickup, the same broken motel sign, and Lila standing beside her car under dim headlights. The timestamps indicated the pictures were taken roughly an hour after her last known phone call. The final image showed her looking toward the direction of the rest stop, caught mid-turn, expression uncertain. Investigators couldn't determine who took the photos, but the perspective suggested she wasn't alone. By comparing the old roadmap found in the backpack with regional construction plans from that decade, Mara realized the red circles aligned with decommissioned payphone sites. One circle matched the rest stop location, another the old motel, and a third marked a maintenance yard listed under Dorson's route. It appeared Lila had been tracking someone's movements or following directions herself. In one of her college notebooks recovered from family storage, there was a note about a part-time job offer from a highway maintenance contractor needing environmental survey assistance. The company name matched the one Dorson worked under. It seemed she had agreed to meet him for seasonal work details before heading back to campus. Witness statements later revealed he sometimes recruited students for short-term roadside surveys. The official theory that emerged in 2014 suggested that Lila met Dorson at the rest stop to discuss the job, grew uneasy, and tried to leave. Something likely went wrong during the encounter, leading to her disappearance. Though no body was ever found, the fingerprints and photos confirmed she had been at that site shortly before vanishing. The case file now classifies her as missing, presumed deceased, with evidence consistent with foul play. Forensic teams continue to analyze the contents of the backpack, hoping to find traces of DNA or fibers linking to Dorson's vehicle remains. The story never made national news, but within the county, it became a cautionary tale told to travelers who stop at the few remaining pull-offs along Route 47. Today, the rest stop is closed to the public, overgrown with weeds, and marked by a faded sign warning of unstable ground. Locals still mention strange finds unearthed after heavy rain, mostly bits of old metal and glass. But those who worked the original case say every new discovery feels like another whisper from that missing night, urging someone to keep looking. Some travelers who pass through swear they've seen faint light near the fence line after dark, like a car parked just beyond the trees. There's never anything there when checked, only tire ruts and crushed grass. Whether coincidence or memory, no one knows. But every few years, another small clue surfaces, pulling the story back from being forgotten again. It's been over 2 decades since Lila's last known sighting. Her family still leaves flowers at the entrance of the closed rest stop each spring. Detective Mara Klein, now retired, keeps the recovered road map framed in her office, the red circles fading with time. She once said in an interview that the map didn't show where Lila went, but where she was trying to escape from. That rest stop remains fenced and silent, a forgotten place holding answers buried just beneath cracked concrete. And though the case remains officially unsolved, every new storm uncovers another reminder that the past, no matter how hidden, always leaves a trace. The stories. The final log entry from a snowbound ranger. It was the last week of February 2017 when the ranger station at Ridge Hollow stopped sending weather reports. The Park Service received one final transmission just after dawn, short and routine, mentioning steady snowfall and limited visibility. After that, nothing. Ranger Colin Havers was 36, a quiet man who had worked at Ridge Hollow for nearly 10 years. He lived for the isolation and the crisp mountain air, rarely leaving the small wooden cabin that served as both his quarters and the outpost. That week, he was scheduled for a 6-day rotation alone, maintaining trail markers and logging avalanche data before the spring thaw. On Monday morning, the snow began earlier than expected. Colin recorded the first flakes at 7:30, noting in his weather log that visibility dropped faster than predicted. By mid-afternoon, the radio link crackled, and dispatch told him to stay put until the storm cleared. He agreed, though he mentioned something strange in the line before signing off. He said he could hear what sounded like chain clinking in the wind outside, even though no vehicles were allowed on the ridge road that week. By nightfall, the storm buried the outpost under several feet of snow. Colin's generator still worked, but the antenna iced over and the radio signal weakened. His written notes from that night were later recovered by a search crew. The handwriting was steady, describing heavy wind, temperatures near -15, and a noise he couldn't identify. He wrote that it came from the direction of the closed ranger cabin near Lake Varnell, 2 miles downslope, which had been boarded for years after a rock slide damaged the foundation. On Tuesday, Colin recorded a drop in barometric pressure and another entry about the sound. He described it as metal striking wood, repeating every few minutes. At 11 that morning, he snowshoed halfway down the ridge to check for fallen trees on the trail. His body camera, recovered months later, showed clear skies for less than a minute before whiteout conditions returned. He spoke quietly to himself, remarking that the sound was louder now, closer, and followed by what he thought were footsteps crunching through crusted snow. According to time-stamped footage, Colin turned back toward the station after only 20 minutes. He reported no sign of wildlife or damage. That afternoon, he added another note in his log. Wind shifted north. Heard a single knock at door. No tracks visible. The station's security camera caught faint movement on the porch at dusk, though the feed glitched from static. By Wednesday, the storm had sealed him inside. Colin kept documenting every few hours. The entries grew shorter and less technical. Around mid-morning, he wrote that someone had tried the door handle. He described muffled voices, maybe 2 or 3, distorted by the wind. The nearest town was more than 30 miles away, and no one was scheduled to relieve him until Friday. The last clear entry in his log came at 7:50 that evening. Power stable, temperature dropping, knocking continues at intervals, possible branch against siding. After that line, the handwriting slanted upward as if written in haste. The next page was mostly blank, except for 3 words written sideways near the margin. Lights on ridge. Thanks for watching, you identities us. When the Park Service sent a snowcat team on Saturday, they found the outpost buried nearly to the roof. The door was still latched from the inside. The lights worked, and the generator ran low on fuel. Colin's radio sat on the desk, switched to transmit, with the mic cord neatly coiled. There were no signs of struggle. The search team followed faint depressions in the snow leading downslope toward Lake Varnell. They stopped about 50 yards from the frozen shoreline, where a cluster of half-buried boards marked the remains of the old ranger cabin. The structure had collapsed years earlier, but one wall still stood. In the drift behind it, searchers found a metal chain looped around a stump. It matched the old boundary chains once used for snowmobiles before the park banned them. Near that spot, under 3 feet of compacted snow, the team discovered Colin's weather log, wrapped in a torn plastic bag. It was damp but legible. The final page showed an unfinished sentence written across the bottom corner. If someone finds this, they came from the lake, not the ridge. Investigators pieced together the timeline using archived dispatch logs, camera footage, and the recovered notes. No footprints or animal tracks were visible when the team arrived, and there were no signs of forced entry at the outpost. The chain found near the old cabin was later traced to storage inventory records from 1989, long before Colin's time. The last person officially stationed at Lake Varnell cabin had reported hearing metal dragging in the woods during a winter patrol in 1993. That ranger retired soon after, citing recurring nightmares and migraines. Audio analysis of Colin's body camera suggested that the knocking sound he described might have come from something resonating in the wind, possibly the station's loose vent cover. However, the single knock at the door and the muffled voices remained unexplained. The distorted recording captured a faint rhythm inconsistent with wind noise. A technician noted that the pattern matched the cadence of someone knocking 3 times, pausing, then knocking once more. No trace of Colin was ever recovered. The snow melted weeks later, revealing nothing but frozen branches and torn fabric near the lake's edge. His coat, gloves, and survival gear were all still inside the outpost. The park closed Ridge Hollow that spring for maintenance and only reopened it 2 years later. In 2021, a hiker named Rosa Levin claimed she found a metal chain near the same spot, lying clean and rust-free on the surface of the snow. She turned it in at the visitor center, where rangers confirmed it matched the description from the earlier report. No official explanation followed. Every winter since then, the automated weather station at Ridge Hollow has recorded faint, low-frequency noises during snowstorms, usually between midnight and 2 in the morning. Technicians dismissed them as data errors from wind pressure, though one analyst pointed out that the sound waveform resembled distant footsteps crunching through snow. Today, the final log entry from Ranger Colin Havers remains preserved in the park's archive. Visitors can request a digital copy, and some say that reading it at night feels like standing in that cabin, hearing the faint tap of metal against wood just before the wind rises. Those who knew him say he never believed in anything supernatural. He trusted his training, his instruments, and the landscape he patrolled. Whatever happened out there in that final storm, it left behind no proof, only a trail of notes written by a man who tried to explain something that should have been impossible. The last words in his notebook, just below the final line, are faint but visible. They read, "Still knocking." Then the pen stroke trails off, ending midair, as if he was interrupted by a sound just outside the door. The stories. This school's locked storage room told the rest of the story. In the spring of 2012, a small-town high school in western Pennsylvania quietly removed an old janitor's closet from its floor plans. There was no announcement, just a sealed metal door behind a new coat of beige paint near the north stairwell. The change went mostly unnoticed until years later, when someone finally asked what had been locked away. The story began with a teacher named Leon Barrett, 38 years old, who taught history and ran the after-school debate club. He was known for his calm voice and his habit of staying late to grade papers in silence. On an ordinary Wednesday in March, Leon planned to leave early for once, since his wife was waiting at home for dinner. Before locking up, he decided to return a box of old projectors to the storage area near the north stairwell. That room had always been cluttered but accessible, filled with leftover furniture and broken science fair boards. He carried the box down the dim hallway, humming without thinking. The door was half open, and he noticed a faint light inside, though no one else was supposed to be there. When he pushed the door, something heavy shifted inside. It startled him enough to drop the box. A metal cart rolled slightly, revealing a large gray trash bag on the floor. It looked freshly tied. Leon figured it was just cleaning supplies, maybe discarded uniforms, but the smell was sharp and chemical. He decided to fetch the janitor, a man named Irvin, who had worked there for decades. By the time Leon returned, the door was closed again. Irvin unlocked it with his key, yet the bag was gone. Only the metal cart remained, damp underneath. Irvin said he had never stored chemicals there, and the school used a separate supply room for that. They checked the nearby trash bins, but nothing matched what Leon described. He laughed it off later, calling it a misunderstanding. Still, he couldn't stop replaying the image of that tied bag and the strange light flickering above it. 2 days later, a faint humming sound came from that part of the building. Students said it buzzed at random hours, sometimes at night when the alarms were set. The maintenance staff checked for wiring faults, but found nothing. The school board approved a quick repaint of the area and locked the door for safety reasons. No further explanation followed, and people simply moved on. In 2019, a new principal named Carla Dunham requested a full renovation of the old wing. During inventory, a worker found an old brass key labeled North Supply 1. No one knew which room it opened. When the custodial crew compared it to the current locks, one door refused to match the same sealed panel near the stairwell behind a coat of beige paint. The contractor tried to pry it open, but said it was welded from the inside. Carla, curious and cautious, checked the archived maintenance records. The last entry mentioning North Supply 1 was dated April of 2012, just weeks after Leon Barrett reportedly resigned without notice. The file contained a short note from the district's facilities manager saying the space was cleared and secured due to persistent odor complaints. And Sir Fanning then, Idisel, that phrasing stood out. Carla asked the maintenance department for any chemical incident reports, but none existed for that year. She also searched staff exit records. Leon Barrett's file listed his departure as voluntary resignation for personal reasons, yet no forwarding address was included. He had taught there for nearly a decade and left mid-semester. Intrigued, Carla contacted two former teachers who still lived nearby. One of them, retired librarian Norma Griggs, remembered Leon well. She said he was quiet but dependable, though during his last month, he seemed distracted, often checking the hallway clock as if waiting for something. Norma also mentioned that the janitor Irvin stopped working there shortly after Leon left, citing early retirement. Carla then requested the district archives for Irvin's employment records. Inside a folder dated 2013, she found a photocopy of an incident report marked confidential. It described a potential biohazard odor near the north stairwell, which was neutralized by removal and sealing. The signature line was smudged, but a faint pen stroke suggested the initials LB. That night, Carla couldn't sleep. The next morning, she met with a local building inspector who advised her to contact the county for old permit data. When those files arrived, they showed that a small floor drain beneath the north stairwell had been capped in 2012. The permit listed it as part of storage consolidation. None of it made sense for a school that size. Finally, Carla approved a limited reopening under supervision. The construction crew began by cutting through the welded frame. When they peeled the sheet metal aside, they stepped into a narrow room filled with rusted carts, broken filing cabinets, and dust thick enough to choke the air. But against the far wall was something odd. A small desk with a green banker's lamp, still plugged in, though the power line had long been disconnected. On the desk sat a brown envelope labeled "For whoever cleans this up." Inside were several printed photographs of the hallway dated March 2012. Each photo showed the storage room door slightly more open than the last, with a faint blur near the bottom edge that looked like a plastic bag. Another photo showed the same spot completely empty, but a faint dark smear remained on the tile. Alongside the photos was a short handwritten note signed Leon. It said, "I didn't mean to find it, but once I did, I couldn't ignore it. They told me to leave it alone, but it's leaking again. Tell Irvin I'm sorry for what we covered." The handwriting matched the archived forms Carla had reviewed earlier. The district quietly handed everything to local authorities, who conducted a short inquiry. The findings were never made public, though an internal memo later mentioned degraded material consistent with formaldehyde and organic residue. The report recommended sealing the area permanently, citing health concerns. When the renovation resumed, workers poured new concrete over the drain and bricked the wall closed. The blueprints were updated, and the space officially ceased to exist. The staff who knew about it agreed not to discuss the details, saying it was better to let the past rest. Yet the janitor, who took over years later, claimed the hallway still carried a faint chemical smell when the heating system ran too long. He once joked to Carla that maybe the old ghosts were still cleaning up. She didn't laugh. She simply nodded and changed the subject. Witness statements from that period suggest Leon Barrett never returned to teaching. Public records list a person with his name moving briefly to New Jersey in 2013, then disappearing from all directories after that year. There's no proof linking him directly to whatever was sealed in the room, but his resignation letter, if it ever existed, was never found. Today, the hallway looks normal. Students pass through it every morning without knowing that behind the smooth coat of paint lies a welded frame and a story the school quietly erased. Some of the teachers who've stayed since those years still remember the odd buzzing that came from behind that wall. When asked about it, they tend to lower their voices and say the same thing. That room was locked for a reason, and according to the records that remain, it told the rest of the story without a single word spoken. The stories. The nurse who recognized a face from years ago. It was a quiet morning in early spring when the small hospital in Maple County received an unconscious man from a roadside crash. Reports said he'd driven off a rural stretch of highway just after dawn. The car had rolled twice, leaving little but twisted metal and scattered papers in the wet grass. The driver carried no wallet, no phone, no identification at all. Nurse Lila Kerr had been working the early shift, handling intake while most of the night staff clocked out. She was 38, calm under pressure, and had spent nearly 15 years in trauma care. That morning was supposed to be routine. She'd planned to finish her notes by noon and finally meet her sister for lunch. Instead, the paramedics rushed in with the unknown man, pale and motionless beneath a bloodstained sheet. When they pulled back the oxygen mask, Lila froze. Something about his face, mud-smeared and bruised, stirred a memory she couldn't quite place. It wasn't just familiarity. It was recognition mixed with disbelief. For a moment, she thought she must be mistaken. The features were swollen, but the jawline and eyes were oddly familiar. She cleaned him up for the attending physician and kept glancing at his face, trying to connect the memory. When the doctor asked for his chart, she whispered, "We don't have one." He came in as unidentified. The doctor nodded, too busy to notice her unease. Over the next few hours, Lila couldn't shake the feeling that she knew the man. She reviewed the intake notes, hoping a clue would surface. The paramedics said he'd been alone, with no other vehicles involved. The crash site was near the Old Pine exit, close to where Maple Lake Road curves into the woods. That detail hit her harder than she expected. Years earlier, in 2008, a local construction worker named Aaron Pike had disappeared along that same route. He'd been in his mid-20s then, last seen leaving a bar after a night shift celebration. Police found his truck abandoned by the guardrail, engine still running, driver's door open. The case faded after months of dead ends. No body, no confirmed sightings, just a stack of missing person flyers that eventually stopped being reprinted. Lila remembered because she'd seen those flyers every day driving to work. Back then, she was new to the hospital, living in a small apartment near downtown. She hadn't known Aaron personally, but his face, square jaw, dark eyes, faint scar near the temple was unforgettable. By late afternoon, the patient had stabilized enough to move to a private room. Lila checked on him between rounds, adjusting his IV and noting small details. He had a healed fracture on his left forearm, an old surgical scar on his knee, and traces of sun exposure common in outdoor laborers. When she compared those to the archived notes in the hospital's missing persons folder, an old binder kept by security for unidentified patients, her pulse quickened. One of the old police bulletins described identical scars. The report had been scanned into their database years ago, but few ever looked at it now. That night, after her shift ended, Lila sat in the staff lounge, scrolling through the old news archives on her tablet. Most articles about Aaron Pike had vanished behind paywalls, but she found one cached copy from 2009. It included a photo of him smiling at a picnic, his hair longer but unmistakably the same. She stared at the image, then at the printed photo she'd quietly taken from the patient's intake wristband camera earlier. The resemblance wasn't just close. It was exact. The next morning, she brought her findings to the attending physician, Dr. Henley, and asked to contact local authorities. Henley was cautious, but agreed. The hospital faxed a report to the county sheriff's office, noting a possible identification match pending fingerprints. Deputy reports later confirmed that the man's prints were partially damaged, likely from years of manual labor, but enough ridges remained to begin a comparison. While waiting for results, a deputy named Fields visited the hospital to gather details. According to Lila's notes, the patient had regained brief consciousness late that evening, muttering a few words before fading out again. She recorded them as near the water and still there. The phrases made little sense at first, but Fields found them interesting. In the original disappearance, the search teams had focused near Maple Lake, just 2 miles from the crash site. Over the next few days, as the man's condition improved, his identity became clearer. The fingerprint analysis matched old employment records for Aaron Pike. He'd been alive all along. The question was where he'd been for 17 years. When he finally woke fully, Lila was by his bedside. He looked around, confused, blinking against the bright hospital lights. "You're safe," she said softly. "You're in Maple County Hospital." He nodded weakly, but didn't speak for several minutes. When he finally did, his voice was rough, like someone unused to talking. He asked what year it was. When she told him, his expression shifted to disbelief, then quiet resignation. Over the next few days, investigators visited him daily. Their questions circled around the same topics: where he'd been, who he'd been with, how he'd survived. His answers came in fragments. He mentioned working odd jobs under a different name, living in cabins near old logging roads, and avoiding towns. He said he'd been afraid someone was following him. Records later showed that a man using the name Alan Pike had cashed paychecks in nearby counties through the early 2010s. The handwriting matched his own. When asked why he vanished, Aaron reportedly said, "I didn't disappear, I just stopped being found." The strangest detail came when investigators searched the crash site again. In the tall grass beside the wreck, they found a small tin box thrown clear of the car. Inside were old photos, a folded map of Maple Lake, and a child's drawing labeled Uncle Aaron. The photo paper had yellowed, but the handwriting looked fresh. The sheriff's report suggested he'd been trying to return home. The route matched the direction toward his mother's old house, now long sold. When asked about the box, Aaron said little, only that he'd promised someone years ago he'd come back with proof of something he'd seen. That statement puzzled the officers. The only record of proof in the old investigation files was a rumor from 1999, where a few witnesses claimed illegal dumping near the lake had caused strange runoff. The company accused back then folded before any charges. It was all but forgotten. A week later, before the hospital could transfer him to rehab, Aaron checked himself out against medical advice. He signed the papers quietly, nodded to Lila, and walked out the front doors with a limp. No one saw which direction he went. In the following months, local police logged a few unconfirmed sightings: an older pickup seen parked by the lakeshore, a man fitting his description buying gas late at night. Then nothing. Lila kept thinking about that moment she'd recognized him, how one face from years ago had stepped back into reality. She sometimes wondered what might have happened if he hadn't crashed that morning. The official records now list him as living under unverified status. The case remains closed since no crime was confirmed. But every spring, someone leaves fresh flowers at the guardrail near the Old Pine exit, where his car was found. When Lila drives that stretch on her way home, she slows down out of habit. The road dips near the woods, and in the early fog, the reflection off the wet asphalt can almost look like water. She always glances toward the tree line, half expecting to see him standing there, as if time had simply stopped the day he disappeared. The hospital eventually digitized all their old archives, but one photo stayed pinned on the bulletin board above the nurse's station. It's the intake image from that morning, the face she recognized, battered but unmistakably alive. For Lila, that picture serves as a quiet reminder. Sometimes the missing aren't gone forever. Sometimes they're just waiting for someone to finally recognize them. The stories. The forest cabin, where every clock stopped. In late October of 2016, a local park ranger's log noted an unusual report from a stretch of state forest near Red Hollow. Visitors claimed every clock and watch inside a certain cabin had stopped at the same exact time. No one could explain it. And over the years, the story quietly spread among hikers and seasonal workers. That fall, a surveyor named Ellis Keene was assigned to map the southern boundary of the same forest. He was 34, methodical, and usually traveled alone. His day started like any other: clear skies and low fog across the valley, his GPS unit blinking as he hiked toward a cluster of old cabins marked on an archival map. The buildings had been abandoned decades earlier, once used by forestry crews during controlled burns. By noon, Ellis reached the clearing. There were 4 cabins, all nearly collapsed, except for one that still stood with its porch intact. The air felt strangely still. No birds calling, no wind moving through the trees. He noted the silence, but kept working, checking his coordinates and taking a few photos for documentation. He planned to mark the structures, finish his survey, and head back before dusk. When he entered the cabin, the first thing he noticed was the dust. It coated everything, even the kitchen counter where an old ceramic mug still Saturday. Then he saw a small metal clock on a shelf. Its hands were stopped at 7:42. The battery hatch was open, and the cells inside had corroded. That didn't seem unusual. Still, when he pulled his phone from his vest, the screen flickered and the clock app froze at the same time. Thinking it was a glitch, Ellis powered it off and back on, but the device wouldn't boot properly. His handheld GPS shut down next. The compass needle spun slightly, then steadied. He decided to step outside, convinced it was interference from the metal roof or poor signal. Outside, his watch was still working, but as he crossed the porch, the second hand stopped. It didn't tick again. Later, when park staff reviewed his field notes, they found a line written in thick pencil, "Time stopped at cabin 4. All devices frozen." He left shortly after that entry. The following morning, he reported the event to his supervisor, who advised him to replace his batteries and try again. Ellis agreed, but mentioned the air around the cabin had felt charged, like static before lightning. 2 days later, he returned with a ranger named Vera Holt. She was 41, experienced, and known for debunking odd claims. They carried new equipment, including an analog barometer, a mechanical clock, and a backup recorder. The hike-in was calm, though both noticed how quickly the forest grew quiet near the clearing. When they reached the cabin, Vera set her watch beside Ellis's replacement. They both showed 2:15. They entered slowly. Inside, the temperature dropped. Vera marked it at 51 degrees, almost 10 lower than the outside air. The barometer needle trembled. Ellis unpacked a digital recorder and spoke clearly. "Survey return. Cabin 4. Testing time instruments." Before they could continue, Vera's watch stopped. Ellis's did too. Both clocks, the mechanical and digital, froze at 2:17. They left within minutes, shaken but composed. The ranger office filed the report under environmental anomalies, citing possible magnetic interference from subsurface ore. Still, no ore deposits were known in that region. Vera suggested checking historical data. Over the next week, Ellis reviewed forestry archives stored in town. He found that in 1979, a lightning strike had destroyed a radio relay near that same clearing. The incident killed a technician named Dale Fenwick, who had been working alone at dawn. His wristwatch, according to the coroner's log, had stopped at 7:42. That was the same time Ellis first recorded inside the cabin. The coincidence bothered him enough to contact the technician's surviving relatives, but records showed none. The death had been ruled accidental, the structure burned, and the area closed for several years. By 1984, the site had been cleared, and the current cabins built nearby for later survey teams. Ellis and Vera decided to visit once more in early November, bringing an electromagnetic meter and a ranger drone for mapping. This time, they set up camp half a mile away to avoid direct exposure. The drone's video feed transmitted normally at first, then distorted when approaching the cabin roof. Static filled the feed until it froze, the timestamp locked at 2:17. They recovered the drone the next morning. Its onboard clock showed the same. Inside its log files, every frame after 2:17 was blank. No damage, no heat marks, nothing but a complete loss of signal. The Forest Service stored the unit for review, but no faults were found. An engineer later suggested that strong transient fields could cause digital paralysis without physical harm. He added that such effects usually appear near decaying power lines or active seismic faults, none of which existed there. Vera began to suspect something related to that 1979 event. She asked Ellis if the stop times could mark exact electromagnetic echoes, a lingering field from the strike. Ellis doubted it, but noticed something else. Each timepiece that stopped remained frozen permanently. Replacing the batteries or winding them did nothing. Even his backup watch, brand new, refused to restart. It was as if each clock's mechanism seized the moment it crossed the cabin threshold. In December, they compiled their findings for a regional safety review. The report noted temporal device failures, unexplained temperature drops, and alignment with historical lightning activity. It recommended restricted access to the clearing until further environmental testing. The supervisor signed off and filed it quietly. Public maps now list that area as a wildlife restoration zone, closed to visitors. Years later, in 2021, Ellis left the survey department and moved to a smaller town near the coast. He still kept one of the stopped watches in a drawer, its hands locked at 2:17. Friends who visited said the watch felt oddly cold even at room temperature. When asked about the cabin, he would only say it was the strangest silence he had ever felt. Vera continued working for the Ranger Service until her retirement in 2023. During a conference that year, she mentioned the case in a discussion about field anomalies. Her notes still matched the times exactly, 2:17 and 7:42, both recorded decades apart. She ended her talk saying she believed the cabin marked a fixed point left behind by natural energy, not anything supernatural, but a resonance that trapped certain devices in that moment forever. Officially, no further investigations were made. Unofficially, hikers who ignore the closure sometimes mention odd glitches in their phones near Red Hollow. Their videos pause, and watches lag a few seconds before catching up once they leave. Nothing serious, just minor delays. Still, among locals, the phrase stuck. They call it the forest cabin, where every clock stopped. No one lives near the clearing now. The forest has reclaimed most of the old structures. Only the faint outline of a foundation remains, half covered by moss and pine needles. From a distance, it looks ordinary, quiet. Yet anyone standing there long enough might notice how the woods seem to hold their breath, waiting, as if time itself remembers exactly when to stop. The stories. This bus stop appeared on 3 different reports. In the fall of 2017, a small-town police department logged 3 separate reports mentioning the same empty bus stop. Each report came from a different person, none of whom seemed connected. Dispatchers marked them as minor public disturbance calls, but the details didn't match what anyone expected from a quiet street on the west side of town. On the first report, a retired machinist named Leo Varnett had called after midnight. He told the dispatcher he'd seen a woman standing at the old bus stop near Creekview Road, just outside the convenience store parking lot. She wasn't moving, only staring toward the dark field across the street. Leo said he pulled over to check, but when he stepped out of his truck, no one was there. The bench was empty, the street silent. He'd felt embarrassed for calling, but he insisted the figure looked real. The report was logged and closed by morning. 2 days later, a high school custodian named Rhea Conlin phoned the same department. She was driving home after a late basketball game cleanup when she noticed a faint light near that same bus stop. She said it looked like a phone screen being held up bright for a second, then gone. The streetlights were flickering from a recent storm, so the officer who took the statement assumed it was a trick of the wiring. Rhea wasn't so sure. She said she'd slowed her car, saw the shape of someone sitting on the bench, and even caught what looked like movement under the glass shelter. She blinked, and it was empty. Her report went into the same logbook as Leo's, both dismissed as possible misperception. The third call came from a delivery driver named Carlos Peña about a week later. He worked overnight routes for a bakery chain, driving through town around 3 in the morning. His dispatch recording was later archived, and in the audio, he sounds calm but uneasy. He told the operator he'd seen a person sitting completely still at the Creekview, stop again, same side of the road, same posture. When asked to describe the figure, he said the person was wearing a light jacket and had one shoe off, resting beside the bench leg. Officers checked the area within 15 minutes and found nothing. They did, however, find a single worn sneaker lying in the grass nearby. It was damp but clean, size 7, and appeared recently placed. After the third incident, the department's shift supervisor flagged the cluster of calls for internal review. They weren't major crimes, but 3 unrelated witnesses describing the same scene caught attention. An officer named Damon Kerr was assigned to do a short follow-up. Damon had been with the department 8 years and was known for taking quiet interest in the small, strange cases others ignored. He started by checking nearby security cameras. The convenience store had 2 facing the parking lot, but neither pointed directly at the bus stop. One caught a faint reflection in the glass shelter, a flicker shaped like a person's shoulder moving out of frame. The timestamp matched Carlos's call by less than 2 minutes. Damon marked it as inconclusive, but noted it for later. He also reviewed old city maintenance records and found that bus service on that stretch had stopped in 2015, meaning no one should have been waiting there at all. The shelter remained because the county never funded its removal. When Damon visited the site in person, he noticed small details that didn't match any earlier report. The bench had a faint scratch near one end, shaped like a set of initials, maybe AV. He ran that through old missing persons files, but got no direct match. He then checked the shoe found in the grass. It was a plain canvas sneaker, off-brand, women's size 7, sold mainly at a department store chain that had closed 3 years earlier. Nothing connected it to any active case. Still, something about the 3 reports stayed with him. He interviewed Leo first, who insisted again that the woman he saw looked solid, not a shadow or reflection. He described her as mid-30s, dark hair to the shoulders, wearing something light blue. Damon found no record of anyone matching that description missing from the area, but he did find an archived newspaper mention from 2014 about a traffic accident half a mile from the same bus stop. The article said a 34-year-old woman named Alina V. died after being struck while walking home from a canceled bus route. The initials matched the scratch on the bench. That link pushed Damon to dig further. He accessed archived 911 calls from that night in 2014, and the dispatch log confirmed that Alina had been last seen walking past Creekview Road. The call had come from a driver who reported a person stepping off the curb unexpectedly. No foul play had been found. Damon compared weather reports, noting it had also rained that night. In each of the recent sightings, there'd been light rain or mist in the area, even when the rest of the county was dry. He returned once more to the bus stop late at night, parked across the street, and waited. He brought his department tablet to log any details. After about 40 minutes, a small motion caught his eye near the shelter. The reflection in the glass seemed to shift, like someone standing just inside. He stepped out, crossing the road slowly, keeping his flashlight low to avoid glare. When he reached the bench, the air felt damp but still. The ground near the grass was pressed down as if someone had recently been sitting there. Damon took a photo and measured the footprint beside the shoe print, still faintly visible in the mud. It matched a size 7. The next morning, he filed his findings with the supervisor. The department closed the case as unexplained but not criminal. Damon quietly added his notes to a personal folder titled Creekview Observations. Months later, when new recruits trained on handling non-emergency calls, he used the story as an example of multiple source consistency. He emphasized that 3 witnesses describing the same improbable event over separate days meant something had truly happened, even if not fully understood. In the years since, the old shelter has been removed during road repairs, but local residents still mention that spot when storms roll through. A few say headlights catch a figure for a split second at the edge of the road. Others say it's just reflection from the new metal signpost. The records remain accessible through public archives, each time-stamped and transcribed. 3 unrelated people, 3 nearly identical sightings, all tied to a stop where no bus had arrived in years. To this day, the official summary lists the incidents as unfounded, yet the scratch from those initials and the single shoe were logged and photographed. The images are still attached to the file, stored under routine call category. For those who read the notes, the details line up too neatly to ignore. A bench where no one waits, reports from people who never met, and a set of initials linking back to an accident years before. People driving down Creekview Road now pass a plain patch of gravel where the bus stop once stood. There is no shelter, no bench, no sign. But when the rain starts and the streetlights buzz, a few claim they still see a shape by the roadside, standing perfectly still, facing the field. They say it looks like a woman waiting for a bus that stopped running a long time ago. Whether it was coincidence, memory, or something caught between both, no one ever proved what those 3 witnesses saw. The only certainty left in the record is that each described the same place, at the same hour, within 1 week of each other. The notes remain brief but clear, written by different officers in separate ink colors, 3 calls, 1 stop, and a mystery still marked unresolved. The stories. What divers found beneath that frozen reservoir? In the winter of 2004, a small-town sheriff's department received a call that would stay in their files for decades. The message was simple: a report of a strange object trapped under the ice near the old Crescent Reservoir. Locals had seen something dark shimmering below the surface, about 50 yards from the North Dam. That morning, Deputy Mark Hensley was assigned to check it out. He was 37, had worked in the county since he got out of the Army, and didn't expect much. Crescent was quiet, the kind of place where the biggest winter problem was a frozen mailbox. He met a few residents by the guardrail who pointed toward the lake. The ice stretched flat and white, except for a darker patch just visible through the thin top layer. Mark radioed dispatch and requested assistance from the volunteer dive team. Two divers, retired firefighters named Leo Vargas and Connor Pike, arrived with a truck full of gear. The temperature was barely 10 degrees, and the wind cut across the frozen water. They set up near the shoreline, drilled a narrow entry hole, and prepared to descend. Mark stayed by the truck, scanning the lake and keeping notes. He remembered a case file from 1991 about an accident near the same dam. A truck had gone off the service road during a storm, but it was never recovered. Locals said the reservoir was drained and refilled back then, so nobody knew if anything still rested below. Leo and Connor entered the water while a third volunteer handled the tether lines. For several minutes, nothing came through the radio except short bursts of static. Then Connor's voice broke in. "We found something metallic. Looks like a cab, but the roof's caved in." Mark leaned toward the receiver and asked for confirmation. Connor replied, "Yeah, a pickup. Definitely old. I can see part of the grill." They resurfaced 15 minutes later, faces pale from the cold. Leo handed Mark a waterproof camera case. Inside were 3 blurry images. Even through the frost, Mark could see a rusted vehicle resting sideways on the lakebed, its windshield gone. On the hood was a faint outline that looked like a decal or emblem. Mark contacted the county records office that afternoon. Using the partial license number visible in one of the photos, a clerk found a match. The plate was registered to a 1989 Ford belonging to a man named Travis Keene. The name stopped Mark cold. Travis had been listed as missing since the night of a snowstorm in February 1991. According to archived reports, Travis was 26 and worked as a mechanic in a nearby town. He'd left a local bar around midnight and never made it home. Officers at the time believed his truck slid off one of the canyon roads and into the water, but divers back then hadn't found a trace. The official note in the file read, "Likely submerged, recovery not feasible due to conditions." Mark reviewed the archived case photos the next day. The description of Travis's truck matched perfectly, right down to the cracked rear bumper. He called the sheriff and requested permission for a controlled recovery. By the following week, the ice had thickened enough to support the equipment. A crane crew from the State Highway Department was brought in, along with a forensic specialist from the regional office. The divers marked the location with a weighted buoy, then cut a larger access hole in the ice. Using guide cables, they looped straps under the frame and signaled the crane operator. It took nearly 2 hours to bring the vehicle up. The old Ford broke through the surface, streaming water and frozen weeds. The cab was half collapsed, and the driver's side door had folded inward. Inside, beneath the shattered steering wheel, they found skeletal remains still wearing fragments of a denim jacket. Forensics confirmed through dental records that the remains were Travis Keene. His family, who had since moved away, were notified quietly. Officially, the cause of death was listed as accidental drowning after a crash. But one detail in the autopsy report bothered Mark. There was a hairline fracture across the back of the skull that predated the submersion. The report said it could have occurred during the crash, but there was no sign of similar impact to the front or sides of the cab. Mark went back through the original missing persons file and noticed something odd. A statement from Travis's coworker mentioned that Travis planned to meet someone the night he disappeared. The coworker didn't know who, but said Travis seemed nervous. He'd also mentioned finding something strange at the garage that week. The report didn't explain what it was, and no one followed up. Mark tracked down the coworker, now living 3 counties away. The man remembered Travis clearly. He said Travis had been working late when he noticed a set of car parts delivered under another employee's name. The parts didn't match any registered repair order. He told the man that he thought someone was using the shop to store stolen auto equipment. That was the last time he saw him. With that lead, Mark requested to re-examine a few warehouse permits from the early 1990s. The garage had changed owners twice, but one document caught his attention. The name listed on a storage lease matched an old suspect from a separate theft case, a man named Raymond Holt. Back in the day, Holt had been investigated for trafficking stolen vehicles across state lines. He vanished around the same time Travis went missing. Mark contacted a retired investigator who worked the Holt case. The man recalled receiving an anonymous call in 1992, claiming that Holt fled after an argument with a mechanic who threatened to report him. That call was never verified, and the number traced back to a payphone near the Crescent Service Road, the same road Travis likely took the night he disappeared. When Mark compared the timeline, it aligned too neatly to ignore. Travis left the bar after closing, the storm intensified, and he drove toward the reservoir route to avoid the main highway. If Holt had followed him, the icy road would have been perfect cover. The blow to the back of the skull could have happened before the crash, suggesting a struggle. Despite the gaps, the sheriff's office reopened the case briefly in 2005 to check for any surviving evidence. They tested samples from the jacket and steering wheel, but found no DNA beyond Travis's own. Holt was never located, and the case went inactive again. The file now carries a handwritten note added by Mark, dated 2009, that reads probable foul play, offender deceased or untraceable. Locals still talk about the day the reservoir gave up its secret. Every winter, when the surface freezes, visitors stop by the North Dam to see the marker placed near the discovery site. It's a simple metal sign stating recovered vehicle, February 2004. No name, no story, just the date. Those who knew the old case say that's fitting. Crescent Reservoir doesn't reveal everything at once. The divers only found what time had decided to return, and that was enough to close a page left open too long. The stories. A traveler's dashcam revealed what police missed. In early spring of 2019, a highway maintenance crew found an abandoned sedan parked at a sharp turn near an old state route. Its doors were locked, windows rolled up, and the driver's wallet was still inside the glove compartment. The engine was cold, and there were no visible signs of struggle. The missing driver, 34-year-old field engineer Nolan Reeves, had reportedly been on his way to a construction site about 2 hours away. Nolan lived alone in a rented house on the edge of a small mountain town. He was known among coworkers as reliable but quiet, someone who preferred radio static over conversation. That Monday morning, he left home before sunrise, texting his supervisor that he would stop for coffee at a roadside diner along the route. Witnesses later confirmed seeing him there just after 6:30. Security footage showed him paying for his coffee and stepping outside to pump gas before heading north. That was the last verified sighting. By the following afternoon, when Nolan failed to check in or return home, a coworker reported him missing. The local sheriff's department searched the route, assuming a mechanical failure or accident. The area was steep and prone to fog, with winding shoulders and dense pine forests on both sides. A volunteer team scanned the woods, and divers checked a nearby reservoir, but there was no trace of Nolan or any personal items. Investigators found only his car 3 days later. The keys were missing, but his toolbox and work tablet were on the back seat. Tire tracks suggested the car had rolled to a stop rather than crashed. The gas tank was nearly empty, yet there was no indication of where he had gone. The case went cold after a month. Almost a year later, in early 2020, a traveler named Caden Holt uploaded a series of dashcam clips to an online road trip channel. He had been documenting quiet drives through rural routes during lockdown, setting his camera to record automatically. One of his subscribers, familiar with the missing person case, recognized a stretch of road matching the one where Nolan's car had been discovered. In the footage, dated May 10, 2019, just before dusk, a small silver sedan was seen parked on the shoulder with its hazard lights flashing. At first glance, it seemed ordinary, just another stranded driver. But about 15 seconds into the clip, the camera caught a faint figure crossing the road behind the car. The person was wearing a reflective vest, similar to what Nolan wore for work. The movement was slow, as if the person were scanning the woods. The figure then turned toward the trees and disappeared from the frame. When Caden was contacted by investigators, he provided the raw file. Metadata confirmed the timestamp aligned almost exactly with the day Nolan went missing. Police had originally focused their search north of the bend, believing he had taken a detour toward a service station. The dashcam angle revealed he had actually stopped before the turn, several miles south of the main checkpoint. That single detail changed the entire timeline. Authorities revisited the scene in summer 2020. Vegetation had grown thick, but drone mapping showed a faint trail behind the guardrail, barely visible from the road. Following that path, searchers found remnants of a reflective safety vest caught on a branch and a cracked flashlight partially buried in mud. Further in, they found a shallow drainage gully where runoff had eroded the soil after heavy storms the previous year. Inside, it lay scattered fragments of plastic, later confirmed to be from a portable work radio issued by Nolan's employer. The discovery reignited public interest. Local volunteers began cross-referencing satellite images from the months after Nolan's disappearance. One drone hobbyist discovered faint tire impressions near a service access road connecting to the old hydro dam site about a mile west of where the vest was found. Police theorized Nolan might have walked toward that area after running out of gas, possibly believing there was maintenance access to the highway. Reports from archived dispatch logs revealed a 911 call made around 7:15 that evening from a weak mobile signal along the same corridor. The call was incomplete. The operator heard background wind and what sounded like a man saying "stuck near water" before the connection dropped. At the time, it was dismissed as a prank since no follow-up calls were received. Reviewing the records in 2020, technicians traced the approximate signal to a low valley less than half a mile from the drainage site. In late autumn, a specialized search and rescue team using ground-penetrating radar detected metal debris beneath a layer of compacted silt near the lower bank of the old dam spillway. Excavation revealed part of a work boot, a collapsed metal lunch container, and a company ID badge with Nolan's name. The body was recovered soon after, identified through dental records. The cause of death was listed as accidental drowning, consistent with flood conditions from a storm that struck the region the night he vanished. The final report concluded that Nolan had likely run out of fuel, pulled over, and attempted to reach a nearby maintenance station on foot. The reflective vest and flashlight suggested he expected to be seen by passing drivers. When the storm intensified, he probably followed the drainage line toward what he thought was a service trail, but ended up near a fast-moving overflow channel. The drop-off was steep and hidden by brush. What made the case remarkable was how a casual dashcam clip, filmed by someone just passing through, corrected an entire search map. Without that footage, the last known location would have remained misidentified, and the recovery might never have happened. Investigators later confirmed the timestamp discrepancy between Nolan's phone data and his car's onboard system matched the footage precisely. When the case file closed, Nolan's family requested that the full dashcam segment be included in the public record, hoping it might encourage travelers to keep cameras rolling on isolated roads. Caden never sought recognition, saying only that he was glad the footage helped. In the end, it was a small detail, the angle of a parked car and a flash of a vest that revealed what months of searches had missed. The quiet footage from a traveler's dashcam turned out to be the final witness to Nolan's last steps. The stories. What the motel clerk heard through the wall. In the fall of 2011, a roadside motel outside Flagstaff became the focus of a strange and quiet investigation. For years, nothing unusual had ever happened there, except for what one night clerk reportedly heard through a thin drywall partition. The clerk, a man named Travis Geller, was 34 and had been working nights at the Oakcrest Motel for nearly 5 years. The motel sat near a truck route, quiet except for the distant hum of engines. Travis liked that peace. He'd spend most nights behind the front desk, sorting receipts, refilling coffee, and watching the security feed play on an old monitor. On a Thursday in late October, the weather had turned cold enough that the parking lot lights reflected off wet asphalt. Around 10 at night, a woman checked in alone. She gave her name as Dana Holt, and asked for a room away from the road. Travis handed her the key to room 12. She thanked him, carrying a small suitcase and a grocery bag of snacks. For the first few hours, everything was normal. The cameras showed her entering her room, closing the curtains, and turning off the porch light. Then, sometime after midnight, Travis heard something faint through the wall behind the office. The room next to his was room 12. At first, it was only muffled talking. Maybe a phone call? Then, a sudden thump made him look up. He listened closer. A man's voice spoke in short bursts, though Travis couldn't make out the words. Dana's voice followed, quieter, almost pleading. Another dull sound hit the wall, then silence. Travis froze, waiting for another noise. When none came, he picked up the motel's landline and dialed the room number. The phone rang twice, then went quiet. No answer. He walked outside, standing in the cool air beneath the buzzing neon sign. The light from room 12 was still off. The curtain edges didn't move. Travis knocked lightly on the door and said, "Front desk? Everything all right in there?" No response. He waited a few seconds before heading back to the office. He told himself not to get involved, but the feeling in his chest wouldn't fade. The next morning, the cleaning staff reported that room 12 was empty. The bed was made, but wrinkled, and one of the pillowcases was missing. The towels were damp. The front door was locked from the inside, but the sliding window in the bathroom was open just enough for someone to crawl through. Travis checked the ledger. Dana Holt hadn't returned the key. Later that afternoon, a state trooper came by after a trucker reported seeing a woman walking along the highway barefoot around dawn. The description matched Dana. The trooper asked Travis about her check-in time and if anyone had been with her. He said no one else had entered that room, at least not through the front. But then he remembered the man's voice. When they reviewed the security feed, the footage from the hallway camera outside room 12 had a 10-minute gap between 12:23 and 12:33. The system had glitched before, but rarely that precisely. The trooper asked if Travis could export the rest of the footage to a disk. He did, watching the progress bar move slowly while the officer walked the perimeter. That night, Travis stayed after his shift, replaying the audio from the front desk mic that captured faint background noise from the wall. Around 12:25, a distorted thud came through the speakers, followed by muffled words. It wasn't clear, but he thought he heard "don't go" and something that sounded like a cry. The clip was only 8 seconds long. Investigators later found a partial print on the bathroom window frame, but it didn't match Dana's. The motel kept its records for only 90 days, so by the time another team followed up, the old guest log had been overwritten. Travis remembered the handwriting on her check-in card, though. Careful, small letters. She had written her address in Tucson and her reason for travel as visiting a friend. A few months later, a backpack was found near a drainage ditch 30 miles south. Inside were toiletries and a folded motel brochure from the Oak Crest. No wallet, no phone. The local sheriff's office never confirmed if it belonged to Dana, but Travis recognized the handwriting on a scrap of paper inside. It looked like the same small lettering from the sign-in sheet. He kept thinking about the man's voice. Some nights, he convinced himself he'd imagined it, that the old building carried sounds from other rooms. But when the maintenance crew opened the wall between the office and room 12 to fix wiring, they found something odd. Behind the insulation was a small gap in the studs, just wide enough for someone to crouch. There were 2 cigarette butts and a crushed soda can inside. Travis reported it immediately. The investigators reopened the file briefly, noting that the access panel behind the vending machine led straight into that wall cavity. Anyone could have slipped in from the maintenance corridor without using the hallway. That corridor had no camera coverage at the time. One retired detective later said in an interview that the cigarette brand found inside the wall matched a pack seen on the desk in a photo taken from room 10 weeks earlier. That guest, an unidentified man, had paid in cash and left before checkout. Records showed he requested a room near the office, but changed to room 10 at the last minute. Travis stayed at the Oak Crest for 2 more years, though he said the nights never felt the same. Sometimes guests asked him why the office had a new patch of drywall behind the counter, and he'd just say it was for wiring. The motel changed ownership in 2017, and the old records were boxed and sent to storage. In 2019, a podcaster covering unsolved travel disappearances requested the archived dispatch logs from that night. They confirmed a call placed from the motel office at 12:37, reporting a disturbance. The report listed no follow-up, suggesting the responding unit had been diverted to a highway accident nearby. That small clerical note became the final timestamp in the case file. No one ever confirmed what Travis truly heard through the wall. He moved to Phoenix and stopped talking about it publicly after the motel closed. But in one of his last interviews, he mentioned something that never appeared in the reports. He said that right before the noise stopped, he heard the man's voice say something else. "I'll be right back." And then, silence. Years later, the Oak Crest lot sits empty. The sign faded and the room's boarded up. Locals drive past without noticing. But the building still stands. And some nights, if the wind hits the siding just right, it makes a low rattling sound that travels through the wall. Travis once said, "It's probably just air pressure." Still, he never checked to be sure. The stories. Why no one returns to that roadside diner? Locals still talk about the old diner off Route 30, the one with the flickering red sign and the peeling paint. It closed in 2009 after a string of strange incidents, and no one ever reopened it. County records list it as abandoned, yet every few years, someone reports lights on inside after midnight. Back in 2007, a man named Aaron Keene was working late shifts at a nearby auto shop. He was 28, single, and known for keeping to himself. That Friday night, he planned to stop by the diner before heading home. It was his routine. He'd grab coffee, maybe a slice of pie, chat briefly with whoever was on duty. According to his coworker, Aaron clocked out around 11:45. Security footage from the shop showed him leaving in his old green pickup, headlights fading toward the highway. The diner was only 10 minutes away. But he never made it home. His landlord reported him missing 2 days later when his rent check hadn't shown up. Deputies found his truck parked outside the diner early that Monday morning. The front door was unlocked, lights flickering inside, a half-empty coffee pot sat on the counter, and a single booth looked recently used. His keys were still in the ignition, but Aaron was gone. There was no sign of a struggle, no broken glass, no footprints leading away. The waitress who'd worked that shift, a woman named Cora Lane, told investigators Aaron never showed up. She said business was slow, maybe 3 customers the whole night. She closed a little after midnight, wiped down the counter, and locked up as usual. When they told her the door had been open, she swore she'd checked it twice. Deputies reviewed security footage from the diner's old camera system. Most of the tapes were blank from static, but one reel showed movement inside around 12:15. The clock on the footage was off by several minutes, but the scene was clear enough. Someone walked from the kitchen to the counter, paused, then turned toward the back hallway. The person wasn't Cora. The figure was taller, wearing a dark jacket, head slightly tilted as if listening. The tape ended seconds later with a burst of white noise. Technicians couldn't restore the rest. They sent it to the state lab, but nothing more came out of it. The diner's owner, an older man named Del Harris, said the system had been glitching for months. He claimed the footage probably showed static interference. When investigators returned the next day, the diner smelled faintly of burned coffee and motor oil. An officer noticed small smudges on the back door handle, possibly fingerprints mixed with grease. Lab results came back inconclusive. The prints didn't match Aaron, Cora, or anyone in the state database. The door opened to a gravel path that led toward an empty field and the tree line beyond. A volunteer search party combed the area for days. Dogs picked up a scent halfway down the field, then lost it near an old drainage ditch. Inside the ditch, they found a rusted lunchbox containing faded photos of the diner's early days. One picture showed the same booth where Aaron's cup had been left. The back of the photo had a note written in shaky ink. "We still wait here after closing, and we evermin as that and not ready." Locals later said that box had never been there before. Dell insisted it must have been old promotional junk, maybe from the 60s, but no one could explain the note. By late summer, the investigation cooled. Aaron's case was filed as missing under unusual circumstances. The diner stayed closed for several weeks, then quietly reopened under a new manager. It lasted only a few months. Workers complained about strange noises from the kitchen after hours and voices faintly coming through the jukebox when it wasn't plugged in. One cook, a young guy named Mateo Ruiz, quit after a night shift in which he said he saw someone standing in the hallway near the freezer door. He thought it was his coworker until the figure turned, and he realized the eyes were completely dark. He ran out without clocking out. Mateo told a local paper he wouldn't step foot there again. When county officials finally shut the place down in 2009, they cited electrical hazards, mold, and faulty wiring. The building was left to rot beside the highway, but people still drove by to take photos. In 2015, a pair of college students filmed a short documentary about abandoned spaces and visited the diner without permission. They were inside for less than 20 minutes. Their footage, later uploaded to a small forum, showed the same red vinyl booths covered in dust, menus scattered across the counter, and a single cup sitting upright on the table near the window. The students said it wasn't there when they arrived, yet it appeared in the playback. They swore no one else was inside. A retired deputy, interviewed years later, said he never forgot the smell that night they found Aaron's truck. It was faint, like ozone after lightning. He claimed every report since had mentioned the same thing. That metallic air, sharp and dry. He believed something happened in that diner unrelated to crime or accident, something they couldn't categorize. An archived dispatch log from that era mentioned another detail that never made the papers. Around 12:18 that night, a driver passing by called to report seeing someone standing on the roof. The caller described the person as motionless, staring east. The responding unit arrived 5 minutes later, but the roof was empty. When maintenance crews removed the old sign years later, they found a deep scratch along the metal letters, almost like a name had been carved but never finished. The piece was melted at the edge, though there had never been a fire. Workers said the air around it felt warm even though it was winter. People sometimes claimed to see lights still coming from inside on foggy nights, always flickering white and blue. Others say the jukebox plays faintly when you walk too close. But the county finally fenced the property off in 2021 after trespassers kept showing up. Nothing official has happened there since. Every file on the case remains open, labeled as missing person, unexplained, no foul play ever proven, no remains ever found. Some think Aaron ran off, others believe he stumbled into something beyond what anyone could explain. What stands out is that everyone who spent time in that diner after hours described the same thing. The silence wasn't just quiet. It pressed in like static, as if the air itself were listening. These days, truckers still pass the spot without slowing down. The sign's long gone, the windows boarded, only the faint outline of the word open remains visible when headlights sweep across the glass, and those who grew up around there know the unspoken rule. No one stops. No one goes inside. No one returns to that roadside diner. The stories. This unmarked photo changed a cold case forever. In early 2015, an unmarked photograph turned up in a box of estate donations at a small thrift store outside Dayton, Ohio. It looked ordinary at first glance, showing two men beside an old gas station, both smiling, both unaware that the picture would reopen a 20-year-old cold case. The store clerk, a retired teacher named Lorraine, noticed something odd about the background. Behind the men was a car that matched one reported missing in 1995. That year, a man named Cody Hasker had vanished after finishing his shift at a printing warehouse in the outskirts of Dayton. He was 28, recently engaged, and driving a beige Buick that never showed up again. Local papers at the time mentioned only a few leads, mostly from coworkers who said Cody planned to meet someone after work. Detectives followed up, but nothing connected. Eventually, his file was boxed and archived. Lorraine, who volunteered part-time at the store, thought she recognized the car from old newspaper clippings she'd seen years earlier. She called a friend who worked at the county library, and together they pulled microfilm copies of missing persons articles. The Buick's dented left fender matched perfectly with the one in the photo. That was enough for her to bring it to the local sheriff's office. Detective Neil Calder, who'd been with the department since the early 2000s, reopened the Hasker file. He started by reviewing archived dispatch logs from the week Cody disappeared. One record caught his attention. A call from a nearby rest stop, logged around 10:30 that night, reported a man arguing near a parked beige sedan. The caller's name was listed only as T. McCready. When Calder tried to trace it, he found no current address. He looked again at the photo. One of the two men was easily identifiable from an old company ID tag found in Cody's personnel file. That was Cody. The other man's face seemed familiar, though his features were partly shadowed. Calder compared it to employee records from the same warehouse. He found a resemblance to a former coworker named Travis McCready who'd left the area in early 1996. Calder tracked down McCready's last known residence in rural Indiana. The property had changed hands several times, but an older neighbor remembered the man. She said Travis kept to himself, often working odd hours, and once drove a beige Buick for a few weeks before selling it cheap. She remembered that because he mentioned buying it from a friend who didn't need it anymore. The detective documented the interview and sent the photo for forensic enhancement. When the print came back, it revealed a small detail missed earlier. A highway sign behind the gas station read, Route 43, Junction 2 miles. That sign had been removed in 2001 during road construction, but the highway records showed which gas stations operated near it. Only one matched the photo's structure. An old Sinclair station closed in 1996. Calder and a crime scene tech visited the site, now an empty lot. Using ground-penetrating radar borrowed from a neighboring county, they scanned the back area where the cars had once parked. The equipment flagged a buried object near a line of dead brush. When they dug, they found fragments of a license plate consistent with late 80s Buick models, though the rest had rusted beyond identification. Back at the office, Calder examined the chain of events. Cody left work around 9:45, was reportedly seen arguing near the rest stop, and never came home. Travis quit his job within weeks, drove a similar car, then disappeared from state records. When the photo surfaced, both men appeared friendly, standing together like coworkers, taking a casual snapshot. Reporters later found that the box of estate donations came from an old farmhouse cleared after the passing of a retired mechanic. His inventory logs, found by his daughter, mentioned storing one Buick shell sold for scrap in 1996. She turned over the remaining paperwork to the sheriff's office. One receipt listed the seller as T. Macar. With no address, the case gathered quiet momentum. Detectives pieced together service records showing the mechanic had received a stripped car matching Cody's VIN sequence, missing its registration plate. The yard had melted the body months later, but photographs from their ledger book showed faint traces of the same fender dent seen in the thrift store photo. Calder requested DNA testing on a recovered key fob found near the radar site, though degraded by time. It matched samples from Cody's sister, confirming at least part of the car's remains were connected to him. Prosecutors said it wasn't enough for charges without more evidence tying McCready directly, but the new findings were substantial enough to change the file's status from inactive to pending. A journalist covering the development located archived time cards from the warehouse, showing that Cody and Travis had clocked out within minutes of each other the night Cody disappeared. The two often shared rides when weather was bad. Several coworkers, interviewed again decades later, said they remembered tension between them after Cody got promoted. One recalled hearing Travis say, "I'm not waiting forever to get what I deserve." Detectives searched property listings and traced Travis's possible movements after 1996 through Social Security logs. The trail ended in southern Illinois, where a man matching his description worked briefly under a different name at a grain elevator. That job ended after only a month. His employment record ended there. No further traces appeared in tax or hospital records. The thrift store photo, now preserved in evidence storage, became the focal point of renewed public interest. Online forums dissected every visible detail, from the gas prices on the sign to the shadow direction indicating the time of day. Amateur analysts estimated the photo was taken close to 6:30 in the evening, likely the same night Cody vanished. If accurate, it meant the two men had been together shortly before the argument reported near the rest stop. One witness, who came forward after seeing the renewed coverage, said she remembered passing a beige car stopped along Route 43 around dusk that same week. She saw two men standing outside, one holding a jacket. When shown the enhanced photo, she pointed to Cody's image and said she was almost sure that was him. Blat my asked. The investigation reached a partial conclusion in 2017 when forensic teams excavated a drainage area behind the old Sinclair site. They recovered a wristwatch, confirmed through engravings to belong to Cody Hasker. No other remains were found, but the watch, the key fob, and the Buick fragments together formed a credible timeline. Calder summarized the findings in a final report submitted before his retirement. It concluded that Cody likely met with Travis after work, that an altercation occurred near Route 43, and that Travis disposed of the car to the mechanic under false pretenses. Whether the incident was premeditated or accidental remained unresolved. After the report's release, the sheriff's office received an anonymous envelope containing an old gas receipt from 1995. The handwriting on it matched Travis's employment form. The location printed on the receipt matched the same Sinclair station seen in the photograph. The timestamp placed it 30 minutes after Cody's last confirmed sighting. No one ever claimed the photo or explained how it ended up in the donation box. Lorraine kept volunteering at the store, though she said she always felt uneasy sorting through estate boxes afterward. She told a reporter she believed the photo surfaced when it did for a reason, that someone wanted the truth found. Today, the Hasker case remains technically unsolved but no longer forgotten. Each year, local deputies use it as a training example in evidence preservation classes. The unmarked photograph that started it all now sits in a glass display in the county archives. It's faded around the edges, colors washed to sepia, but the scene is clear enough. Two men stand side by side near a forgotten gas station, unaware that a simple picture would one day unravel everything left buried beneath the quiet fields of Route 43. The stories. This small-town morgue kept one separate file. In a quiet Midwestern town, the county morgue held a single file that staff rarely mentioned and never misplaced. It was labeled only with a date from 1999, the folder edges soft from years of handling and quiet speculation. That spring, a young mortuary assistant named Lyle Granger started his first week at the county facility. He was 27, patient, and detail-oriented, the kind of man who balanced work with late-night radio shows and long walks by the river. His first day was simple. Check the logs, clean the instruments, review the intake files. By Friday afternoon, he already knew where everything was, except for that one drawer at the back of the archive cabinet. It was marked Hold, Do Not Refile. When he asked about it, his supervisor, a woman named Carla Mendez, simply said, "Just leave that one be. Old paperwork, long story." Her tone didn't invite questions, and Lyle didn't push. Not then. A few weeks later, a sudden power outage hit the building during a heavy summer storm. Emergency lights flickered, alarms reset, and Carla asked Lyle to double-check the freezer temperatures. While doing that, he noticed something strange in the intake ledger from 1999. A handwritten line read, "Unknown male, mid-30s, recovered near Lake Waller, no ID, case unresolved." The signature at the bottom was the same as the one on the restricted file tag. Curiosity got the better of him. After hours, Lyle opened the archive drawer, heart thudding at the thought of Carla walking in. Inside was that thin beige folder. It held 3 photographs, 1 autopsy sheet, and a single cassette tape marked Intake Room B, OG 4. The photos showed a man with short hair wearing an old fishing jacket. Nothing unusual except a small silver emblem on his wrist. The emblem looked military, but not any branch Lyle recognized. The autopsy sheet noted cause of death as asphyxiation pending toxicology, though the toxicology results were never attached. He borrowed an old player from storage and listened to the tape. It started with the usual background noise of a recorder being placed near a table. Then a voice, calm but uneasy, spoke, "Unidentified male, approximate age 34. Found near Waller Lake. No defensive wounds. Possible self-inflicted trauma." There was a pause, then muffled conversation in the background. A second voice whispered, "Turn it off. Just turn it off." The tape clicked and ended. That night, Lyle couldn't shake it from his head. He checked county records and found no matching missing person from that year. Newspaper archives mentioned a few drownings, but none near Waller Lake. One local story, dated August 5th, 1999, reported a restricted investigation near the same area, citing federal consultation. The article ended abruptly without follow-up. The next morning, Lyle asked Carla again about the file. She looked tired and said quietly, "You found it, didn't you? That case was a nightmare. We were told not to discuss it." She told him the man's body had been claimed a week after arrival by someone with government credentials. The morgue received no official ID, only a signed release form and instructions to destroy all related materials. Carla kept the file anyway, against orders. When Lyle asked why, she said, "Because something about it wasn't right. He had no water in his lungs, but they said drowning. That stuck with him." He went back to the ledger and compared handwriting. The asphyxiation pending note had been added days later in different ink. A few months passed before anything else happened. Then, during a storage reorganization, a retired deputy named Ron Keller visited the morgue to help sort old evidence tags. He noticed the name Waller Lake on a box and froze. "That case again?" he muttered. When Lyle asked if he remembered it, Ron hesitated. "Yeah, sort of." They found the guy tied to an anchor line. But here's the thing. That line wasn't his. It came from a different boat, registered to a state contractor. That's when the feds showed up. Lyle asked what happened next. Ron said the deputies were told to seal everything and stop writing reports. Within days, all field notes disappeared from the sheriff's archive. "Nobody wanted to lose their job," Ron said. That night, Lyle went back to the tape. This time, he let it play past the click. A faint hum continued, then another sound emerged, like water dripping inside a metal container. A soft voice spoke again, quieter this time. "If anyone's hearing this, he wasn't supposed to be here. They'll come for the rest of it soon." The tape clicked again and ended for good. Lyle stayed late that night, writing everything down in his notebook. He planned to take copies of the documents, but when he returned the next morning, the file drawer was empty. Carla said a courier had come early with clearance orders from the coroner's office. She hadn't seen the file leave, only signed the delivery sheet. The signature on the receipt wasn't one of theirs. A week later, an unmarked envelope arrived at the morgue. Inside was a single photograph showing the same fishing jacket man standing by an old boat launch, smiling. The back read, "Taken July 29th, 1999. It had been mailed from 2 counties away with no return name. Lyle checked satellite images of Waller Lake. Finding that the boat launch had been replaced years ago, county blueprints showed an old drainage system running beneath the launch site that connected to a retired military testing area. The emblem from the man's wrist now made a strange kind of sense. It wasn't from a branch of service, but from a private contractor that had worked on classified water testing in the late 90s. When Lyle told Carla what he'd found, she sighed. So, he wasn't a fisherman. He was one of them. The realization left them silent for a while. She finally said, "I kept that file so someone else could finish the record someday. Maybe that's you." A few years later, after Lyle moved on to a hospital position, the morgue building was renovated. During demolition, workers discovered a rusted storage locker sealed behind drywall. Inside was a reel of film labeled Project Alder intake sequence. It was logged, then quietly transferred to a federal archive. No public record mentioned it again. Locals still talk about the Waller Lake mystery. Some claim they saw lights over the water that summer. Others swear the man's body was never buried at all. Lyle never confirmed or denied anything. He kept his notes, but never shared the tape again. In time, the file faded into rumor. Only those who worked that shift remembered the strange orders, the missing forms, and the way every trace seemed to vanish just when someone looked too closely. The small town morgue kept its one secret file for a reason. Whether it held the truth or a cover story may never be known, but in that quiet Midwest town, the name Waller Lake still makes the old staff fall silent. The stories. A janitor's routine shift turned into evidence. It started as a quiet Tuesday in late November of 2019 when the overnight janitor at Brookvale Community Center clocked in. He was 43-year-old Luis Cardenas, a quiet man who preferred to keep to himself and work through the night when the building was empty. He had been on that same shift for nearly 7 years, and nothing about that evening felt different when he first arrived. Luis's job was simple: clean the main hall, check the gym, lock up the offices, and leave before sunrise. The community center had just hosted a charity auction earlier that evening, and folding tables still covered the main floor. He put on his earbuds, filled a bucket, and began wiping down surfaces while his playlist hummed quietly in the background. At around 11:30, he noticed the lights in the conference room were still on. He figured someone had forgotten to switch them off after the auction ended. When he opened the door, he saw a half-empty water bottle, a clipboard, and a small duffel bag on the floor beside a chair. He assumed one of the volunteers would come back for it and decided to finish mopping before collecting any lost items. By midnight, the halls were spotless. Luis pushed his cart toward the conference room again to check the bag. When he bent down to lift it, he noticed something odd about the carpet near the chair. A faint reddish smear caught the light from the overhead fixture. He leaned closer, and his stomach tightened when he realized it wasn't spilled punch from the auction. He grabbed a rag, dabbed at the mark, and froze when it didn't lift. The spot was small, but unmistakably blood. He looked around the room and saw no signs of struggle, no broken glass, no overturned chairs. Still, the unease grew. Luis reached for his phone and decided to call the after-hours supervisor, a man named Kent Wallace, who lived 15 minutes away. Kent told him to stay put and not to touch anything else until he arrived. Luis waited by the reception desk, glancing back at the conference room every few minutes, half hoping he had imagined it. When Kent finally showed up, he crouched by the stain, shining a flashlight over it. He said quietly, "We should get the police to take a look, just to be safe." The responding officers arrived just after 1 a.m., led by Sergeant Ray Mitchell. She asked a few questions about who had used the room earlier that evening. Luis mentioned the auction crew, mostly volunteers and staff from a local nonprofit. Kent added that one of them, a woman named Paula Griggs, had been looking for her missing phone before the event wrapped up. The officers took samples and asked Luis to walk them through his cleaning route. While doing that, he remembered the security cameras mounted above each hallway and near the conference doors. Sergeant Mitchell requested the recordings, and Kent logged into the system using his office desktop. The footage showed people packing up around 10:30, Paula included, carrying 2 boxes and her purse. At 10:50, she re-entered the room alone, carrying what looked like a silver keyring. After that, the camera feed froze for 12 minutes before resuming, showing the room empty. Technical support later confirmed that the 12-minute gap wasn't a glitch. Someone had manually disabled that specific feed using the system's internal login. The timestamp of that login matched 10:51, just 1 minute after Paula walked back in. The access ID belonged to one of the part-time maintenance contractors, a man named Drew Atkins. He had worked only weekends, but occasionally helped with special events when extra setup was needed. Detectives reached out to Drew the next morning, but his phone went straight to voicemail. He didn't show up for his next scheduled shift on Friday either. A check of his locker turned up a spare shirt, a receipt from a local hardware store, and a key fob for a black sedan. According to archived dispatch logs, that same sedan was found parked 3 blocks from the center the following week, unlocked and empty. Forensics later identified traces of the same reddish substance inside the trunk liner. It was matched to Paula's blood type, though not enough material existed for a full DNA confirmation. Witness statements collected from neighbors near the community center reported seeing Drew leaving around 11:15 that night, carrying something that looked like a small duffel bag. Luis recognized that description immediately. It matched the bag he had found on the conference room floor. Investigators returned to question him again. He told them exactly where he had seen it and described how it had looked slightly heavier than a normal gym bag. But when officers searched the room after Kent's initial call, the bag had already disappeared. Security footage confirmed that between 12:20 and 12:30, someone wearing a gray hoodie entered the room and left moments later carrying the bag. The person's face stayed hidden from the camera angle, and the system didn't capture a clear view of their build. Luis spent the following weeks replaying that night in his head. He wondered if he should have moved faster to tell someone or checked other rooms before Kent arrived. But the police told him he had done everything right by stopping work and calling it in. Paula's family later confirmed she had planned to meet someone after the auction to exchange old storage keys belonging to the nonprofit. No one knew who that person was, though her phone records showed a short call made at 10:48 to a number registered under Drew's name. By early January of 2020, Drew was officially listed as a person of interest, but no warrant had been issued yet. He had family in another state, though none claimed to know his whereabouts. The case gradually slipped from local headlines after several months with no new leads. Still, Luis never forgot the sound of his mop bucket rolling down that hallway, the echo carrying through the empty building like a warning. 2 years later, during a routine inspection of the building's basement storage area, Kent found a thin maintenance logbook wedged behind a supply shelf. Inside, several pages were signed by Drew in late November of 2019, listing simple repairs. One page stood out. Under the section labeled Utility Closet, Drew had written, "Moved access conduit for camera, A3 to lower junction. It's tacked us down." Investigators realized that camera A3 was the same unit covering the conference room hallway. The adjustment note explained how the system feed could have been interrupted manually from a side panel without entering the security office. The logbook became a central piece of evidence in reopening the file. A lab analysis found faint traces of adhesive on the back cover, suggesting that a small object had once been taped there. It was too old to test, but experts believed it could have been a storage card or key label. That discovery prompted detectives to re-examine the original footage, now using enhanced restoration techniques unavailable years earlier. The updated review revealed something everyone had missed. In the reflection of the glass trophy case near the conference room door, a blurred figure could be seen standing behind Paula moments before the camera feed cut. Though the face remained indistinct, the outline of the gray hoodie was unmistakable. The discovery reignited interest in the case and gave investigators a clearer timeline. Reports filed later that year confirmed that Drew Atkins had left the state within 48 hours after that night, purchasing a bus ticket under an alias. Authorities never publicly confirmed whether he was located. Unverified reports and archived travel records suggested someone matching his description was detained briefly in southern Arizona in 2021 for a minor traffic violation before disappearing again. The case remained open, with the small bloodstain on that community center carpet preserved as the first and last clear piece of evidence. Luis eventually transferred to another site across town, preferring daytime shifts. He never spoke publicly about what happened, though coworkers noticed he avoided any rooms with security cameras for years after. The Brookvale Community Center replaced its floors the following summer, but the maintenance logbook stayed with the department archives. For investigators, it served as proof that even the smallest routine task, like a janitor's nightly cleaning, could uncover the first clue in a story no one expected. In quiet moments, Luis sometimes thought about Paula's unfinished work, and the brief moment he almost ignored that stain. He understood now that his routine shift had become part of something larger, a record of chance, timing, and the way ordinary nights can sometimes turn into evidence that refuses to fade. The stories. Never answer the radio after midnight at this ranger post. The archived incident logs from a remote forest station show something strange that happened in late October of 2016. Rangers who worked that night still avoid talking about it directly, though their reports match almost word for word. It began as a quiet shift for Ranger Colin Mercer, who had taken the midnight watch at a small post deep inside the state preserve. Colin was 34 and had worked for the Park Service for nearly a decade. He liked the night shifts because there were no visitors and no supervisors checking in. The post sat near a long, dry lake bed, miles from the nearest paved road. His job that night was simple: monitor the weather instruments, keep the fire cameras rolling, and respond to any radio calls from hikers or nearby patrols. Around 11:50, the radio crackled with static, the kind that usually meant someone was switching frequencies. He leaned over and adjusted the dial, but the noise vanished. It happened again a few minutes later, this time followed by what sounded like a voice breaking through the interference. The voice was faint, but clear enough to say, "Base, do you read me?" Colin grabbed the microphone and replied, "Copy that! This is Lakeview Post 4. Identify yourself!" No response came back. He waited another 10 seconds, then repeated the call. Silence followed, except for the soft hum of the fluorescent light above his desk. He noted the time in the logbook and figured it was just a shortwave bounce from another district. At 12:17, the voice returned. This time, it sounded closer and calmer, saying, "Patrol Unit 7, checking in." Colin looked at the shift roster pinned on the corkboard. There was no Unit 7 assigned anywhere in the district. He answered again, asking for a name and location. The reply came after a pause. "At the old ranger station by the lake. Power's out. Can you confirm?" Colin frowned. The old station had been abandoned since 2009 after a wildfire destroyed most of its roof. Nobody had used it in years. He checked the satellite feed on his monitor, which showed only black where the ruins stood. He tried to reach the regional dispatcher, but the uplink was down, likely from the storm forming on the western ridge. By 12:30, rain began to fall. The sound against the metal roof made it harder to focus on the radio, yet he could still hear that same voice calling in short bursts. Each transmission sounded slightly different, like it came through older equipment. "Unit 7 to base. Need assistance. There's someone outside the cabin." He asked who they were seeing. The voice hesitated, then said, "A ranger. Looks like me." The words sent a chill through him. He checked the personnel database again, to be sure, scrolling through old digital files. One entry caught his eye. Patrol Unit 7 had been decommissioned after 1998. The ranger's name was listed as Patrick Lowe, reported missing during a wildfire search in that same area. Colin stepped outside with his flashlight, trying to convince himself the signal was a prank or some kind of frequency overlap. The air smelled like wet pine and burnt soil. He pointed the beam toward the tree line, but the fog made it impossible to see far. The radio on his belt hissed softly, followed by a whisper that repeated his own last transmission word for word. Back inside, he double-checked the emergency archives. There was a folder of old microcassette recordings labeled Incident 1998. He hadn't noticed them before. When he played the first tape, the voice on it was nearly identical to the one coming through the radio. It described the same coordinates and the same broken generator at the old lake station. The last words on the tape were, "If anyone hears this, stay inside." The storm worsened. Power flickered, and the temperature dropped fast. At 1:30, the radio speaker crackled again, louder than before. "Base, this is Lowe. Found the missing boy. Bringing him back now." Colin froze. The missing boy reference matched an archived report from 1998. The boy had never been found, and the ranger who searched for him had vanished. He tried to record the transmission digitally, but the system wouldn't respond. Every button froze on screen, as if locked. Through the static, the voice continued, "Base, I'm seeing lights in the tower." "That you?" Colin turned to the window. A faint white glow pulsed near the abandoned fire tower a mile away. It blinked twice, paused, and blinked again. He switched on his binoculars. The light pattern matched the standard distress signal used before 2000. Against protocol, he grabbed his parka and drove the utility vehicle toward the ridge. The road was slick and nearly washed out, yet he reached the tower around 2. The steps creaked under his boots. The door at the top was slightly open, and the light he'd seen was a weak lantern resting on a desk. Beside it lay a soaked logbook with fresh ink. The date written on top read October 28th, 1998. Each entry matched his own notes from the current night, almost word for word. Even the times were the same. The final line said, "Power lost." Returning to base, Colin looked around, expecting to find old camping gear or rusted equipment, but the place was empty. Only a single Ranger jacket hung on the hook, faded but clean, with a patch reading Unit 7. He returned to his truck, unnerved. The radio came alive again, though the voice now sounded weaker, distant, almost strained. "Base, you there?" "We made it back," Colin answered quietly. "Copy that. Who's with you?" The reply took nearly half a minute. "The boy. He's fine." Then static filled the channel, rising until it sounded like wind screaming through wires. Back at the post, he checked the system clock. It read 4:23, though by his wristwatch, it was barely 3. The uplink came back online shortly after. The dispatcher from Central finally called in, asking if he'd been transmitting during the outage. She said their console showed a repeating signal from his post every 20 minutes, starting at midnight, identical to one first recorded in 1998. Colin filed his report, attached the microcassette, and left before sunrise. When technicians examined the tape later that week, they confirmed the magnetic layer had degraded long ago. Yet the playback clearly included his own voice, though the date code embedded in the audio matched 1998. Park management quietly restricted access to the old lake station after that. Rangers who work nights at Lakeview still mention strange shortwave bursts around midnight, always using the same call sign. They log them as atmospheric noise, though the recordings sometimes capture a faint phrase at the end. "Base, do you read me?" Colin transferred out the following spring. According to coworkers, he refused to take any night assignments again. The archived audio, stored in a locked cabinet at regional headquarters, remains the only official evidence. Technicians who have listened to it say the final seconds include a background sound that resembles a child's laugh, cut short by static. No one has officially confirmed that. The recording is not open to the public. But every ranger who takes the midnight watch at that post hears the same advice before their shift begins. Never answer the radio after midnight at this ranger post.